Hello and welcome to Washington Exec's video series. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with Washington Exec, and with me today is Bob Gemmill. He's a Senior Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer, heading procurement and enterprise partnerships at Leidos. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bob.
Hey, Amanda, thank you, and it's great to be with you.
Of course, of course. So you've also been named Washington Exec's new supply chain chairman. I wanted to ask what led you to this area of expertise to begin with.
Yeah, sure thing. So, if we go back to early in my career, that was really my first exposure to supply chain of any sort. I was working as a project engineer on a large program that had a large outsourced element to it. So we were working with a large number of suppliers and subcontractors, and I had to engage with the company's sourcing team. And it really fascinated me that here's this team that on any given day is interacting with engineering to develop statements of work. They are collaborating with finance on cash flow models and availability of funding. They're reviewing contractual provisions with attorneys. And perhaps most attractive to me was they were forging relationships with the principals of other companies. And that ranged from three-person startups all the way to some of the largest A&D contractors in the world. So if you add all that up and put on top that they were negotiating and closing on multi-million-dollar deals, it just seemed like a pretty interesting area to get engaged in. And so that's really what attracted me to the area.
Got it. So what does strategic sourcing entail?
Yeah. So when some people hear strategic sourcing, they go back to an old historical image of procurement organizations that focused exclusively on price and low-cost operations. And those factors are important, but strategic sourcing is much more dynamic. It takes into consideration things like market forces, supply power, demand power, performance, quality, and probably most importantly, innovation through partnership. And at Leidos, we place a big emphasis in disciplines such as category management, focusing on major and important areas of spend, and also on supplier relationships. We like to make investments in our suppliers so that they feel like they're part of the team and they're comfortable bringing us the absolute best solution. So that's really the difference between strategic sourcing and what some people would think of as a historical procurement organization.
It makes sense. And can you talk a bit about the importance of the supply chain on the entire enterprise?
Yeah, sure, Amanda. Perhaps the best way to look at it would be through a framework consisting of three primary pillars. So, first, and really regardless of industry, having a strong and strategic supply chain is imperative to winning new business and to overall profitability. So prime contractors in the A&D space are typically proposing jobs and working on jobs where 25 to 70% of the job is outsourced. So we can look at that as 25 to 70% of revenue for that company might be running through their supply chain. And companies that fail to have a strategy around that large percentage of their business will find themselves disappointing customers and eventually out of business. So that would be the first one, is that supply chain makes up a large percentage of revenue for most businesses. Really, the second pillar would be technology infusion and acceleration. And what I like to quote would be Bill Joy, who was one of the co-founders of Sun Microsystems, if people remember that company. He once said, "The smartest people in the world don't all work for us." And that's true. So at Leidos, I'm surrounded by brilliant engineers and technologists, but we exponentially advance our innovation capabilities when we collaborate with our technology partners, who also have some very brilliant people. So technology and infusion acceleration would be the second pillar. And the third, and one that has really gained prominence over the past couple of years with the pandemic, is supply chain risk and resiliency. So with global events over the past several years, it really has raised the prominence of supply chain risk and resiliency with government officials and really in boardrooms across the globe. So we have to develop strategies around trade wars increased regulation, supply chain cyber attacks, shortages, supply chain delays. As we speak, if you were to go out to California to the largest port in the U.S., there's 70 cargo ships that are waiting to unload their cargo, and they're spending almost as much time waiting in queue as they are crossing the ocean. So it's really an interesting set of problems that we're facing today. And really, regardless of what industry you're in, you're encountering supply chain delays, whether it's due to transportation issues or the semiconductor shortage.
Well, speaking of the challenges and some of the things that you were just discussing with the supply chain, as chairperson of Washington Exec's new Supply Chain Council, what are you most looking forward to, and what are you hoping to discuss with the council this year and going forward?
Well, first, Amanda, I'm really honored to chair the Washington Exec Supply Chain Council, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with peers from within industry and also the government. So, over the years, I've had the opportunity to get to know many of my peers, and quite frankly, we're all facing similar opportunities and challenges. So, we all win when we collaborate and find solutions to some of these challenges. We're in it together, and we need to demonstrate thought leadership in areas such as supply chain risk and resiliency, compliance, evolving regulations, and we also need to be there to support the small business community as they wrestle with things like cybersecurity, CMMC, and the other challenges that they faced as a result of the pandemic. So I'm looking for us to demonstrate thought leadership and also talk about how we're communicating back to our stakeholders internally, to include the C-suite, the board of directors, on the important issues of the day. It really is our responsibility as supply chain professionals to be communicating and developing strategies around some of the challenges that we've just discussed.
Makes sense. Well, thank you, Bob, for joining me today and for sharing some of your insights on the supply chain, its impact on the enterprise, and your position as new chairperson. Thank you for being here.
I'm really excited about it, Amanda, and thanks for having me.
Of course.